Thank you very much, Chairman Abraham and Ranking Member O'Rourke. I appreciate you having me here today and for considering the Ruth Moore Act in this morning's legislative hearing. I want to talk just a little bit about the bill and why we still think it desperately needs to become law. It's been said that the greatest casualty is being forgotten. I can tell you that the hundreds of survivors who've called my office since I first introduced this legislation in the 113th Congress have felt forgotten by the military system they so proudly served. They struggle trying to meet an unfair standard of proof, suffer through years of denials and appeals in a process that re-traumatizes them. It's a system that's broken, and I can tell you from the countless stories I've heard that it hasn't been fixed. Ruth Moore, who this bill is named for, is a U.S. Navy veteran from Maine who was raped twice during her military service. When she reported it, she was discharged and labeled as having a personality disorder. She spent over 23 years fighting the VA to get disability benefits, and she battled homelessness and PTSD during that time. Quite simply, this act ensures that the VA treat our veterans whose PTSD is caused by sexual assault with the same standards and burden of proof that it extends to veterans whose PTSD is caused by combat and other particularized claims. We know that fewer people are being assaulted and more are coming forward, and that is progress. But still, 19,000 military personnel being sexually assaulted or sexually harassed annually is hardly cause for celebration. I want to talk a little bit about approval rates, and I don't mean our political approval rates that we evaluate every day. I want to talk about the rates at which claims for the VA benefits are being accepted. The GAO did find that the overall approval rate for PTSD resulting from sexual assault is increasing, but it's still lower than the approval rating for PTSD claims for other factors. And what is most concerning to me is that despite continued training, the subjective standards used to verify victims' sexual assault meant approval ratings varied widely depending on where the veteran submitted their claim. In some offices, as few as 14% of claims were approved, while others approved 88%. In the GAO report, the VA states that under the current regulation, 2 adjudicators can interpret a marker in opposite ways, and both will be correct. It's simply not acceptable that a veteran faces the roll of the dice on where they live and where their claim is reviewed. Nor is it acceptable that 62% of the respondents in a recent survey stated that they faced retaliation for reporting. This, as well as evidence that 40% of assailants were perpetrated by a superior within the victim's chain of command, suggests to me that we cannot train our way out of this problem. After a court ruling in 2002, the VA changed its policy to allow veterans a wider range of evidence, called secondary markers, to be used in a personal assault disability claim. The VA will tell you that because the current system allows for this alternative evidence for verifying an assault, there is no need for parity with evidentiary standards. But every day I hear from vets who detail claim denials due to the vast inconsistencies in the VA application of these standards. What one regional office or adjudicator will accept as proof, another will deny. In 2010, the VA relaxed the evidentiary standards for veterans who suffer from combat-related PTSD, as you all know. It's the same diagnosis, but a very different evidentiary standard. The VA finally acknowledged that far too many veterans who have deployed into harm's way suffered the emotional consequences of their service, but could not, through no fault of their own, locate military documentation that verified the traumatic events that triggered their PTSD. The VA now accepts their statement of traumatic events along with a PTSD diagnosis and medical length as enough to receive the disability benefits. The VA's less favorable treatment of veterans who suffered sexual assault than those who suffered other forms of combat trauma is arbitrary. The VA can articulate no rationale for why a veteran's lay testimony may be adequate to establish combat trauma, but not trauma from sexual assault. The Ruth Moore Act corrects this injustice. Last Congress, it was endorsed by a very long list of organizations, including the American Legion, Disabled American Vets, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Vietnam Vets of America, Iraq and Afghanistan Vets of America. It's all detailed in my testimony. I won't give you the whole list, but you can see there is a long list of organizations that support this, and I want to thank them for their support and applaud them for the work they do for veterans. This bill also requires the VA to report MST-related claims information back to Congress, such as the number of denied and approved MST claims each year and the reasons for denial. As members of Congress, we have a responsibility to ensure that the VA is providing timely and accurate decisions to veterans, but we cannot do that without sufficient data. Over the past few years, there's been significant public attention to sexual trauma in the military, and the VA has redoubled its training and prevention efforts. But let me reiterate, the problem is not fixed. It's a problem of fundamental fairness. If a medical diagnosis and link to a claimed event is enough for one group of veterans with the same medical diagnosis, it ought to be enough for another. Critics of this legislation might say that it makes it too easy to get benefits and veterans could just say anything to get those benefits. First of all, that's simply not true. There still needs to be a medical diagnosis of PTSD and a medical link, which are not at all easy to come by and less easy to live with. And secondly, we hear that same argument when the VA proposed a similar change for combat veterans, but in fact, I haven't heard the veterans say they've had big problems with veterans lying about their service. Mr. Chair, over the last 4 years, I've heard from dozens and dozens of veterans from all over the country, men and women who volunteered to serve their country, many of them planning on a career in the military, only to have that career cut short by the horror of a violent sexual assault. The survivors were blamed and harassed, crimes were covered up, and the survivors themselves became the subject of further harassment and incrimination. All too often, what followed was years of mental health issues, lost jobs, substance abuse, and homelessness. But these stories don't have to end this way. With the Ruth Moore Act, we can change the VA's policy so veterans who survive sexual assault get the benefits they earned and deserved. Thousands of veterans, survivors of sexual assault, have fought for years to get the benefits that are owed them, but they didn't give up. So we are not going to give up in our fight to reform this process to make sure that those brave women and men get the justice that they deserve. So thank you again, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member now Titus, and members of the committee for considering this legislation. I appreciate your hearing me out today.